Imagine for a second that it's Friday afternoon, but it's not just any Friday. It's the Friday. You've got the cardboard box under your arm, filled with the stapler you liked, a few pictures of the kids from 5 years ago, and that one mug with the chipped handle. Your coworkers, some you actually like, some you spent 20 years tolerating, are standing around a supermarket cake that tastes slightly like plastic. There's a card. Everyone signed it. Some of the messages are heartfelt, others are just best of luck from the guy in accounting whose name you never quite remembered. You walk to your car, and as the automatic gates of the parking lot swing shut behind you for the last time, you feel this massive, overwhelming sense of what? Relief? Freedom? Honestly, most people think that's the moment their life finally begins. They think they finally escaped the maze. But if you look at the data, and if you look at the way the human body is actually wired, that exit gate might be the start of a very different, much darker kind of countdown. It's a bit of a terrifying thought, isn't it? That the very thing we spend 40 years sprinting toward might be the thing that ultimately trips us up for good. My name is Captain Capital, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, human psychology, and why some people seem to thrive as they age, while others just fade away. I've spent years looking at bank balances and retirement accounts, trying to help people build these massive safety nets. But lately, I've started to realize that the biggest risk to your future isn't a market crash or inflation. It's the void. It's the silence that happens when the alarm clock stops ringing and the to-do list goes blank. We're taught to save every penny so we can one day do absolutely nothing, but honestly, nothing is a biological death sentence. We've been sold a version of the American dream, or the global dream really, that is actually a biological trap. And I think it's time we talk about why your retirement plan might be missing the most important asset of all, a reason to stay alive. The Bismarck Trap, a history of the finish line. To understand why we're so obsessed with this idea of stopping, we have to look back at where this whole retirement thing even came from. It's not like humans have been retiring since the Stone Age. Back then, if you stopped moving, you were dinner. No, retirement is a relatively new invention. It basically started with a guy named Otto von Bismarck in Germany back in the 1880s. Now, Bismarck wasn't some kind of humanitarian who wanted everyone to enjoy their golden years on a beach. He was a cold, calculating politician. He was facing pressure from socialist movements, and he needed a way to keep the working class loyal to the state. So, he came up with a social insurance plan. He set the retirement age at 70. Here's the kicker, though. Back in the 1880s, the average life expectancy was about 45. Honestly, it was a genius move. He promised everyone a state-funded vacation at the end of their lives, knowing full well that almost nobody would actually live long enough to collect it. It was a financial promise with no intended payout. Later, they lowered the age to 65, but even then, people weren't living much longer. Retirement was designed as a death benefit for the few survivors of the industrial machine. It was never meant to be a 30-year period of leisure. But then, medicine got better. Sanitation got better. We stopped dying of simple infections and started living into our 80s and 90s. The system stayed the same, but the human lifespan stretched. We took a political tool designed for the dying and turned it into a lifestyle goal for the healthy. And that's where the trouble starts. When you take a biological organism that has evolved over millions of years to solve problems, find food, and contribute to a tribe, and you suddenly tell it that its job is to sit in a recliner and watch daytime television, the internal systems start to shut down. It's like a car that sits in a garage for 5 years. The seals dry up, the fuel turns to varnish, the battery dies. Humans aren't meant to be parked. We are high-performance machines that require a load to stay stable. Without that load, we don't just relax, we drift. The biological off switch. Use it or lose it. Have you ever noticed how some people retire and within 6 months they look 10 years older? It's not just your imagination. There's a very real physiological off switch that gets flipped when we lose our sense of utility. I've seen it happen in my own circles. Vibrant, sharp individuals who, once they no longer have a place to be, start to lose their physical gait, their mental sharpness, and even their will to engage. It's kind of heartbreaking, honestly. We have this use it or lose it policy built into our DNA. Think about your brain for a second. It's the most energy-hungry organ in your body. It's also incredibly lazy. If it doesn't have to solve a problem, it won't. When you're working, you're constantly navigating social hierarchies, solving technical issues, and managing schedules. Your brain is firing on all cylinders just to keep up. But when you retire, and the most complex decision you make is what flavor of jam to put on your toast, your brain starts a process called pruning. It says, oh, I guess we don't need these neural pathways for complex problem solving anymore. Let's clear those out to save energy. And it's not just the brain, it's the whole endocrine system. We need a certain amount of good stress, what scientists call eustress. Eustress is the pressure of a deadline, the excitement of a project, the physical demand of getting to work. This stress keeps our cortisol levels in a healthy rhythm and keeps our immune systems on high alert. When you remove all stress, your body's defense systems go on a permanent lunch break. I've read studies that suggest the risk of a heart attack or a stroke spikes significantly in the first year after retirement. It's like the body says, mission accomplished, shutting down systems. We've spent so long trying to escape the grind that we didn't realize the grind was actually the thing keeping our gears turning. The social vacuum and the silent killer. We're social animals, right? I mean, we all like to complain about that one coworker who eats loud chips or the boss who sends emails at 11 p.m. We think we want to get away from them. But for the vast majority of adults, the workplace is their primary and sometimes only source of social interaction. It's where your tribe is. Even if you don't hang out with these people on the weekends, they are the people who acknowledge your existence for 8 hours a day. They call your name. They ask for your opinion. They see you. When you retire, you don't just lose a paycheck, you lose your tribe. You lose that daily check-in with humanity. And here's the scary part. Loneliness is literally more dangerous than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It's a silent killer. I've seen people go from being the go-to person in an office to being someone who doesn't speak to another human being until they reach the grocery store checkout line on Tuesday afternoon. That shift is a massive shock to the system. When you're lonely, your body stays in a state of hypervigilance. Your blood pressure goes up, your sleep quality drops, your inflammation markers skyrocket. We think we're retiring to peace and quiet, but for many it turns into isolation and silence. And silence is where the mind starts to eat itself. You start dwelling on every little ache and pain, you start worrying about things that don't matter. Without the external noise of a job to distract you, your internal monologue becomes a roar. Honestly, I think the death spiral of retirement is often just the physical manifestation of a broken heart, not necessarily from sadness, but from a lack of connection. We need to be needed. It's a fundamental human requirement, right up there with water and oxygen. The Ikigai gap. Why some people never truly stop. I've always been fascinated by the blue zones, those places in the world where people regularly live to be over 100 and still look like they could go for a hike. If you look at Okinawa, Japan, they don't even have a word for retirement in the way we do. Instead, they have this concept called Ikigai. Loosely translated, it means a reason to get out of bed in the morning. For an Okinawan centenarian, their Ikigai might be tending to their garden, or teaching the neighborhood kids, or being the spiritual head of their family. They don't have this finish line mentality where they hit 65 and just stop. They simply shift their focus. Their work evolves as their body ages, but the effort remains. In the West, we've created this weird binary. You're either a productive member of society or you're retired. There's no middle ground. And because our identity is so tied to our job titles, when the title goes away, the identity vanishes too. I once talked to a former CEO who told me that the day after he retired, he felt like a ghost. He went to his local coffee shop and nobody knew who he was. He didn't have any meetings, he didn't have any fires to put out. He had plenty of money, more than he could ever spend, but he had no weight. He felt light, but not in a good way. He felt like he was floating away. That's the Ikigai gap. If your only reason to get up is because a corporation tells you to, you're in trouble when that corporation stops calling. We have to build our Ikigai outside of our employment long before we actually quit. It's why you see some people thrive in retirement. They're the ones who are always busy with hobbies, volunteering, or side projects. They didn't retire, they just changed their primary employer to themselves. They kept the engine running, just at a different RPM. As someone who spends a lot of time looking at numbers, I have to address the financial side of this death spiral. We're told to save for a target number. Once you hit that number, you're safe. But money is just a tool for access. The question is, access to what? Most people's retirement budgets are based on their current lifestyle minus work expenses, but they forget to factor in the boredom tax. When you have 40 extra hours of free time a week, you're going to spend money. You're going to travel or take up expensive hobbies or go out to lunch more often. But more importantly, if you don't have a purpose, you'll try to buy a purpose. You'll buy the fancy RV you don't really need. You'll buy the memberships to clubs you don't really enjoy. You'll try to fill the void with consumption. But consumption doesn't provide the same dopamine hit as contribution. Buying a new car feels good for a week. Solving a difficult problem or helping someone else feels good forever. I've seen people burn through their life savings, not because they were unlucky, but because they were trying to buy their way out of a depression caused by boredom. It's a financial spiral that mirrors the physical one. You spend more to feel alive, which creates financial stress, which further degrades your health, which leads to more medical bills, and suddenly the golden years are looking pretty tarnished. Honestly, the best financial advice I can give anyone isn't about asset allocation or tax loss harvesting. It's about finding a way to stay economically relevant for as long as possible. Not because you need the money, but because being economically relevant means you're still providing value to the world. And providing value is the best health insurance there is. Let's get a bit more technical about the brain for a second. There's this phenomenon often called retired brain. It's a very real cognitive decline that sets in when we stop challenging ourselves. Your brain is a plastic organ. It's constantly rewiring itself based on your environment. When your environment becomes predictable and low stakes, your brain's processing speed slows down. Think of it like a muscle. If you stop lifting weights, your muscles atrophy. If you stop lifting mental weights, your cognitive reserve shrinks. This reserve is what protects you against things like Alzheimer's and dementia. People with high cognitive reserves can have the physical markers of Alzheimer's in their brain, but show zero symptoms because their brain is so well connected, it just works around the damage. How do you build that reserve? By doing hard things. By learning new languages, by navigating new cities, by engaging in debates, by learning a new craft. Retirement often involves the exact opposite: comfort. We want everything to be easy. We want the all-inclusive resort version of life. But comfort is the enemy of growth, and in the brain's case, it's the enemy of survival. I've always thought it was funny, and by funny I mean slightly tragic, that we spend our youth wishing for a life with no problems, and then when we finally get it, we realize that problems were the only things keeping us sharp. It's like a video game. If you turn on God mode where you can't die and you have infinite money, the game gets boring in about 10 minutes. You need the stakes. You need the threat of failure to make the reward of success meaningful. Without stakes, your brain just goes into standby mode, and standby mode is a very dangerous place to be when you're 70 years old. Let's get a bit more technical about the brain for a second. There's this phenomenon often called retired brain. It's a very real cognitive decline that sets in when we stop challenging ourselves. Your brain is a plastic organ. It's constantly rewiring itself based on your environment. When your environment becomes predictable and low stakes, your brain's processing speed slows down. Think of it like a muscle. If you stop lifting weights, your muscles atrophy. If you stop lifting mental weights, your cognitive reserve shrinks. This reserve is what protects you against things like Alzheimer's and dementia. People with high cognitive reserves can have the physical markers of Alzheimer's in their brain, but show zero symptoms because their brain is so well connected, it just works around the damage. How do you build that reserve? By doing hard things. By learning new languages, by navigating new cities, by engaging in debates, by learning a new craft. Retirement often involves the exact opposite: comfort. We want everything to be easy. We want the all-inclusive resort version of life. But comfort is the enemy of growth, and in the brain's case, it's the enemy of survival. I've always thought it was funny, and by funny I mean slightly tragic, that we spend our youth wishing for a life with no problems, and then when we finally get it, we realize that problems were the only things keeping us sharp. It's like a video game. If you turn on God mode where you can't die and you have infinite money, the game gets boring in about 10 minutes. You need the stakes. You need the threat of failure to make the reward of success meaningful. Without stakes, your brain just goes into standby mode, and standby mode is a very dangerous place to be when you're 70 years old. The transition strategy: how to retire without quitting. If you're approaching that magic age, or even if you're decades away, you need a transition strategy. You can't just go from 100 miles per hour to zero overnight. That's how you go through the windshield. You need to downshift instead. Start by decoupling your identity from your job title right now. Who are you if you're not a VP of sales or a senior engineer? If you don't have an answer to that, that's your first homework assignment. You need to build a portfolio of self that includes hobbies, community roles, and personal projects. Secondly, consider phased retirement. Instead of quitting cold turkey, could you go down to 3 days a week? Could you become a consultant? This keeps your social ties intact and keeps your brain engaged while giving you more time for yourself. It's like a taper before a marathon. You're letting your body and mind adjust to the new reality. And finally, you have to embrace the idea of being a beginner again. One of the reasons people hate retiring is because they go from being an expert at work to being a nobody at home. That ego hit is brutal. But there is so much life in being a novice. Learn to play the piano, learn to code, learn to pickle vegetables. The act of learning, of being bad at something and getting better, is the ultimate fountain of youth. It forces your brain to create new connections. It gives you a reason to try again tomorrow. Honestly, I think the secret to not dying in retirement is to always have something on your schedule for next week that you're a little bit nervous about. That nervousness is your body's way of saying, okay, we're still here, let's go. The new retirement, a call to action. We're living in a weird time. We're the first generations of humans who can reasonably expect to live 30 years after our primary careers are over. That's a long time. It's basically another entire adulthood, and we've been given no roadmap for it other than relax. But relax is a terrible strategy for a 30-year period. You can't relax for 3 decades. That's not relaxation, that's stasis. And stasis is just a slow-motion version of death. I want you to look at your retirement plan, not just the 401k or the pension, but your life plan. If it doesn't include a way to be useful, a way to be social, and a way to be challenged, then your plan is incomplete. It's actually dangerous. You're saving up for a trip to a destination that doesn't have any oxygen. You have to be your own chief purpose officer. You have to curate your life so that you never actually stop. You just transition. You move from the must-do to the want-to-do, but you keep doing. You keep moving. You keep solving. Because the moment you decide you've arrived is the moment you start to leave. I know it sounds a bit intense, and honestly it is, but I've seen the alternative, and it's much worse. I've seen the quiet rooms, the flickering TVs, and the eyes that have lost their spark. And I don't want that for you. I want you to be the person who is too busy to die. I want you to be the person whose to-do list is still a mile long on your 95th birthday. Because at the end of the day, money is great and freedom is wonderful, but meaning is the only thing that actually keeps the lights on. Don't let the death spiral of retirement catch you off guard. Build your lifeboat of purpose now, so that when you finally sail away from the corporate docks, you're not just drifting, you're heading toward a new horizon. I'm Captain Capital. You know, I was talking to my grandfather a few years before he died. He was one of those guys who never really stopped. He retired from the railroad at 65, but honestly, you wouldn't know it. He was always in his barn, fixing someone's lawnmower or helping with the books at the local church, or teaching me how to sharpen a knife. I remember asking him once, "Grandpa, why don't you just sit down and rest? You've earned it." He looked at me with a mischievous smile and said, "Capital, the moment I sit down and rest, the earth will start looking for a place to put me. I'd rather stand on my feet and not let the earth guess." That's always stuck with me. It sounds a little funny, but there's so much truth to it. We must keep the earth in the dark. We must remain too active, too engaged, and too stubborn to simply disappear. So here's my challenge to you. Don't wait until you're 65 to find your Ikigai. Don't wait for your golden hour ceremony to figure out who you are outside of work. Start building your second life today. Take a course, join a club, start a side hustle that has nothing to do with making money, but is all about making an impact. Your future self will thank you, not just with a bigger bank account, but also with a heart that still beats strong and a mind that's still sharp enough to enjoy every second of this journey.